A billionaire stood on stage and called his pregnant wife emotionally unstable in front of investors. The crowd applauded. His mistress smiled. What no one in that room knew was that he had just activated the very plan that would destroy him. Because when the truth went on record, the applause stopped, and the handcuffs came out. The chandeliers in Dominic Hale's penthouse reflected power more than light. New York's financial elite filled the glass-walled ballroom overlooking the Hudson, their conversations layered with numbers, contracts, and speculation. The Hale Foundation's annual charity gala had become more than philanthropy, it was positioning. In less than 2 weeks, Dominic's technology firm awaited final federal review for a multi-billion-dollar defense analytics contract. Tonight was optics. Elena Whitmore stood near the balcony doors, one hand resting lightly over her 7-month pregnant stomach. She wore composure the way others wore diamonds. Few in the room knew that she had once helped Dominic build the early architecture of Hale Technologies, long before investors and media attention transformed it into a global name. Dominic moved through the crowd with calculated confidence, cameras tracking him, donors eager for proximity. At his side stood Camille Brooks, radiant in silver, her smile practiced for headlines. She had mastered the art of appearing essential without appearing accountable. "Elena," Dominic called across the room, his tone sharp enough to cut through conversation. The shift was immediate. Faces turned. Silence gathered. Elena approached slowly, aware of every lens pointed toward her. "Yes, Dominic?" His expression was composed but cold. "I think it's best if you step away from the event." A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. "I beg your pardon?" she asked evenly. "You've been under considerable stress," he continued, voice amplified by the surrounding hush. "It's not wise for you to be here tonight." The implication landed harder than the words. Elena's pulse remained steady. "This is my foundation too." "Not anymore," Dominic replied. "You've made several emotional decisions lately. I can't risk instability in front of federal observers." There it was. Not a private conversation. Not concern. A narrative. Cameras captured every second as 2 security staff approached, instructed with subtle nods. They did not touch her. They did not need to. The message was clear. Camille stepped forward, tilting her head slightly. "Some women just aren't built for this level of pressure," she said lightly, just loud enough for nearby microphones to record. "Power isn't for everyone." A few uncomfortable laughs followed. Elena felt the weight of humiliation settle across her shoulders, heavier than the pregnancy itself. But she did not argue. She did not cry. She simply looked at Dominic, really looked at him, and noticed something she hadn't seen before. Not anger. Calculation. As she walked toward the elevator under the glare of cameras, her phone vibrated. A banking notification flashed across the screen. Access suspended. Another followed. Joint accounts frozen. The elevator doors closed softly, sealing her out of the spectacle above. By the time she reached the lobby, news alerts were already trending. Hale CEO escorts pregnant wife from gala amid personal concerns. Personal concerns. Outside, the night air felt colder than expected. Elena stood beneath the glow of city lights, breathing carefully as her child shifted gently inside her. She replayed the moment in her mind, not the humiliation, but the timing. The federal contract approval meeting was in 11 days. Dominic had recently been defensive when she questioned certain offshore transactions linked to compliance filings. He had dismissed her curiosity with a smile too quick to be genuine. And now, public removal. Financial restriction. Emotional instability narrative. It aligned too perfectly. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a bank alert. Unknown number. She hesitated only a second before opening it. "You were removed because you know what's in the offshore file." The city noise faded into background static. Offshore file. Her mind returned to the late-night spreadsheet she had glimpsed weeks ago, shell entities connected to internal analytics licensing tied to federal pilot programs. She had asked questions. Dominic had changed the subject. Now he had changed the narrative. Above her, in the penthouse ballroom, applause resumed as Dominic took the stage. He spoke about innovation, responsibility, national security partnerships. Camille stood beside him, smiling with visible satisfaction. Elena has always struggled with pressure, Dominic said smoothly into the microphone. I'm focused on protecting my family and my company. The room applauded again. Outside, Elena's humiliation cooled into clarity. This was not emotional. It was strategic. Dominic had not removed her from the gala because she was unstable. He had removed her because she was observant. She looked down at her phone once more, reading the message again. You know what's in the offshore file. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to consider a possibility that felt colder than betrayal. Dominic wasn't protecting his image. He was protecting something illegal. And if that was true, tonight had not been the end of her role. It had been the beginning. Elena did not sleep that night. The message remained open on her phone long after the gala ended and the headlines circulated. She replayed Dominic's words from the stage, the careful phrasing, the public framing of her as unstable. It had been too deliberate to be emotional. Dominic never acted without a calculated reason. By morning, another message arrived from the same unknown number. If you want proof, meet me. 9:30 a.m. Battery Park. Come alone. Elena hesitated only briefly before replying with a single word. Where? The reply included a specific bench near the marina. Nathan Reed was not the kind of man who drew attention. Former Chief Financial Officer of Hale Technologies, he had quietly resigned 3 months earlier under what the media described as personal reasons. Elena knew better. Nathan was meticulous. Principled. He did not walk away from numbers without cause. He stood as she approached, his expression guarded but resolute. You shouldn't have come publicly, he said quietly. You shouldn't have sent the message if you didn't want me here, she replied. Nathan studied her for a moment, then nodded once. Dominic is moving faster than expected. Elena's hand rested instinctively on her stomach. Explain. Nathan sat and opened a slim laptop shielded with a privacy screen. The federal defense contract isn't just about analytics, he began. It's about predictive data modeling tied to pilot surveillance programs. I know that, Elena said. I was there when the initial proposal was drafted. You weren't there for the revisions, Nathan replied. He pulled up financial overlays. Dominic inflated Hale Technologies' valuation by projecting future licensing revenue from pilot programs that were never fully authorized. Those projections were used to secure private investment tied to the federal bid. Elena's jaw tightened slightly. Speculative forecasting isn't illegal. Not unless you route federal pilot data through offshore holding entities to mask exposure, Nathan said. He clicked again. A corporate structure map appeared, shell corporations layered across Delaware, Bermuda, and Luxembourg. Elena, Nathan said carefully, your name appears here. Her breath stilled. Spousal compliance authorization, he continued. Dominic used shared executive privileges to distribute signature thresholds. If an audit traces fund flow irregularities, liability extends to you. I never signed anything, she said quietly. You didn't need to, Nathan replied. Your embedded authorization credentials were pre-approved when you were still listed as strategic advisor. The realization felt colder than humiliation. The divorce, she said slowly, was risk insulation, Nathan confirmed. If regulators investigate post-contract approval, you become the narrative scapegoat. Emotional instability. Prenatal stress. Poor judgment. Elena absorbed the precision of it. Dominic had not acted impulsively at the gala. He had created distance before exposure. What about Camille? She asked. Nathan shook his head. She has no idea about the offshore routing. She sees prestige, not structure. That aligned with everything Elena had observed. Camille operated on optics. Dominic operated on architecture. How much time? Elena asked. Nathan's expression darkened slightly. 12 days until final federal contract review. Once approved, capital inflow increases leverage. Investigations become more complex. He handed her a slim encrypted drive. This contains valuation drafts, internal email chains, and offshore routing confirmations tied to Dominic's biometric approvals. Elena stared at the device without touching it. Why are you giving this to me? She asked. Because I refuse to certify final compliance adjustments, Nathan said. And because Dominic assumes you'll stay silent to protect yourself. Elena finally took the drive. He froze my accounts last night, she said quietly. Publicly questioned my stability. Nathan's voice lowered. He's preparing the narrative. A gust of wind moved across the marina. Elena felt her child shift gently, grounding her in the present. If I file a complaint before contract approval? She asked. Federal agencies will have to pause review, Nathan said. But he will retaliate. He already has, she replied. They stood simultaneously, the meeting concluded without further dramatics. As Elena walked toward the street, she felt a subtle awareness behind her. The same black SUV she had seen parked outside her building the previous night now idled near the curb. Tinted windows. Engine running. Dominic's security detail was not there by coincidence. She did not turn around immediately. She allowed the car to remain in her peripheral vision as she reached the crosswalk. Nathan's final words echoed in her mind. He assumes you'll stay silent. Elena looked down at the encrypted drive in her hand. Dominic had removed her from the gala to protect his empire. He had underestimated something fundamental. She understood how it was built. As she stepped into a waiting car service, she caught the faint reflection of the SUV pulling slowly into traffic behind her. They weren't just observing. They were reporting. And Dominic now knew she had met someone. The black SUV did not disappear after that morning. It became routine. Elena noticed it outside her apartment building before sunrise and again across the street from the prenatal clinic later that afternoon. It never approached. It never made contact. It simply existed, close enough to remind her that she was being monitored. Dominic Hale did not confront problems emotionally. He studied them. Inside his corner office overlooking Manhattan, he sat across from a crisis management consultant from one of the most aggressive PR firms in the country. She met with Reed, the consultant said calmly, reviewing surveillance photos. We can't control what she knows. But we can control how she's perceived. Dominic nodded once. Then control it. Within 48 hours, subtle headlines began appearing in digital publications with strong investor readership. Sources close to Hale divorce cite emotional strain. Insiders suggest prenatal stress played role in gala incident. The language was careful. No accusations. Just concern layered into implication. Camille Brooks appeared on a daytime financial talk show 3 days later, dressed in soft pastels, her voice gentle and sympathetic. Elena has always been intense, she said with a measured smile. I think the pressure of public life was overwhelming for her. The host nodded gravely. She's pregnant, after all. That's a delicate time. The clip spread across social media within hours. Elena watched it from her living room, her expression still, her breathing controlled. She understood the strategy instantly. Dominic was not trying to silence her through force. He was trying to dilute her credibility before she spoke. Her phone buzzed with another notification. Emergency custody petition filed. The document cited erratic emotional behavior and concerns regarding prenatal decision-making under stress. It requested preliminary review of custodial safeguards upon birth. He wasn't just protecting his contract. He was weaponizing parenthood. Elena sat at the dining table and closed her eyes briefly. Anger surfaced, sharp and immediate, but she let it pass. Reaction was what Dominic expected. Instead, she scheduled a meeting. Victoria Sloane's office carried the quiet authority of someone who had stood against federal agencies and won. A former prosecutor turned defense strategist, Victoria specialized in financial crime and regulatory escalation. She listened without interrupting as Elena laid out the offshore structures, Nathan's evidence, the embedded authorization, and now the custody filing. When Elena finished, Victoria leaned back slightly. If the documents Reed provided are authentic, this is more than aggressive forecasting. This is structured deception. Elaborate, Elena said calmly. Inflated valuation tied to anticipated federal revenue that isn't fully authorized, Victoria replied. Offshore routing to mask exposure. Distributed liability through spousal authorization. It's deliberate. And the custody petition? Elena asked. Strategic, Victoria said. If you file a complaint, he can argue emotional retaliation. He's building insulation. Elena's jaw tightened slightly. How long until federal contract approval? Victoria checked her tablet. 12 days. Silence settled in the room. If we file a sealed complaint with the Department of Justice before that review, Victoria continued, they are obligated to pause contract approval pending preliminary assessment. And if we wait? Elena asked. Once the contract is finalized, unwinding becomes exponentially harder. Elena looked down at her stomach as her child shifted gently beneath her palm. He humiliated me publicly, she said quietly. He questioned my stability in front of investors. Victoria's voice remained steady. He's shaping perception. Elena met her gaze. My child will not inherit corruption, she said. Victoria nodded slowly. Then we act. But understand something clearly. Filing this complaint triggers escalation. Media pressure intensifies. Surveillance increases. He will not absorb this quietly. I don't expect him to, Elena replied. Later that evening, Elena's phone rang. Dominic. She considered ignoring it, then answered. You're making this difficult, he said evenly. You filed for custody, she replied. I filed for protection, he corrected. You're under visible stress. Stress caused by you, she said calmly. Withdraw whatever you're planning, he said, his tone cooling. Focus on your health. And what are you focusing on? She asked. There was a pause. Legacy, he said. Then perhaps you should review what you built it on, she answered softly. He ended the call without another word. Back in Victoria's office the following morning, the final draft of the sealed complaint was prepared. Every document cross-referenced. Every biometric authorization confirmed. Every offshore entity mapped. Victoria looked up from the file. Once this is submitted, she said quietly, there's no partial retreat. It becomes full-scale retaliation. Elena didn't hesitate. Submit it. Victoria studied her for one last second before closing the file. Prepare yourself, she said. He won't just defend, Victoria added. He'll attack. And for the first time, Elena understood that humiliation had only been the opening move. 10 days. That was the distance between Dominic Hale and federal contract approval. 10 days between suspicion and immunity. 10 days between exposure and insulation. Inside her apartment, Elena Whitmore sat at her dining table surrounded by printed documents, encrypted drives, and a laptop disconnected from Wi-Fi. She had learned enough from Dominic's world to understand that evidence unprotected was evidence erased. Every file Nathan Reed had given her was duplicated onto multiple encrypted storage devices. One copy was delivered to Victoria Sloan's secure archive. Another was placed in a bank safety deposit box under Elena's maiden name. Dominic believed in control. Elena believed in preparation. Across the city, Dominic convened an emergency board call. "We move the review timeline forward," he said firmly. "Investor hesitation grows the longer we wait." A board member's voice came through the speaker. "The Department of Justice inquiry." "There is no formal charge," Dominic interrupted. "Only speculation." But the word inquiry lingered in the room like smoke. Dominic understood that speed was leverage. The faster the contract approval locked in, the harder it would be to unwind valuation structures. He pressed the board to reinforce compliance narratives, to accelerate internal audits, to project stability. Perception was currency. Meanwhile, Camille Brooks appeared at another high-profile charity luncheon, cameras eager for reaction. When asked about Elena, she sighed softly. "I truly hope she finds peace," Camille said, her voice layered with condescension masked as sympathy. "Public life isn't for everyone." The line was rehearsed. Delivered with a faint smile. Online commentary intensified. Elena watched none of it. Instead, she recorded a video. She positioned the camera carefully, her tone measured and unshaken. "My name is Elena Whitmore. I have been publicly described as unstable and emotionally overwhelmed. I want to state clearly that I am neither. I am concerned about documented financial irregularities tied to federal contracting procedures." She paused only once. Silence protects no one. She saved the recording but did not release it. Not yet. Timing mattered. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week. Dominic's legal team framed the filing as preventative concern. Elena's attorney framed it as retaliatory strategy. Court filings were precise, clinical, and devoid of emotion. But beneath the legal language lay something deeply personal. Dominic wasn't just attacking her credibility. He was attempting to define her motherhood. In Victoria Sloan's office, discussions shifted toward federal whistleblower protections. If the Department of Justice determines you acted in good faith to expose potential misuse of federal funds, Victoria explained, retaliation becomes part of the case. "And if they don't?" Elena asked. "Then we rely on documentation," Victoria replied. The evidence was structured, organized chronologically: valuation inflation drafts, offshore routing logs, embedded authorization credentials, internal compliance emails. It told a story without needing dramatics. Dominic sensed movement but lacked specifics. His security reports confirmed Elena had met with Nathan. They confirmed meetings with Victoria. They did not confirm what she possessed. That uncertainty unsettled him more than accusation would have. Late that evening, he called Camille into his study. "She's escalating," he said. Camille crossed her arms lightly. "Then end it." "It's not that simple," Dominic replied. "It was simple enough when you embarrassed her publicly," Camille said sharply. Dominic's gaze hardened. "That was necessary." "For optics," she pressed. "For survival," he answered. Back in Victoria's office, the final draft of the sealed complaint to the Department of Justice was complete. It outlined potential misuse of projected federal data licensing revenue, offshore fund routing, and distributed liability manipulation. It requested immediate review prior to contract authorization. Victoria looked at Elena carefully. "Once this is filed, Dominic will know. He won't know what we submitted, but he'll know something shifted." Elena nodded. "He already believes I'll stay quiet." Victoria sent the encrypted submission through secured federal channels. The room fell silent. For a moment, nothing happened. No sirens. No headlines. Just the quiet weight of irreversible action. Elena felt the baby move gently beneath her palm, steady and alive, unaffected by market timelines and boardroom pressure. Across the city, Dominic reviewed revised compliance statements prepared for federal review. He believed acceleration was protection. He was wrong. Victoria's phone vibrated. She glanced at the secure notification, then looked up slowly. "The Department of Justice has acknowledged receipt," she said. Elena exhaled carefully. The countdown had just shifted direction. The notice arrived without spectacle. At 8:42 a.m., Dominic Hale's executive legal team received formal communication from the Department of Justice. Federal contract review suspended pending preliminary inquiry into financial disclosures and valuation representations. The message was precise. Clinical. Final. Dominic read it twice, his expression unchanged, but his grip on the document tightened slightly. Around him, the executive floor of Hale Technologies shifted from confidence to controlled alarm. Analysts stopped mid-conversation. Assistants lowered their voices. Screens that had displayed projected contract revenue were quietly minimized. The freeze was not an accusation. It was worse. It was uncertainty. Within minutes, market speculation triggered volatility. Private investors began requesting clarification calls. Analysts shifted language from anticipated expansion to regulatory pause. Hale Technologies stock trembled under the weight of unanswered questions. Dominic closed his office door and dialed his general counsel. "How exposed are we?" he asked calmly. "It's preliminary," she replied. "But they've cited concerns regarding offshore routing and valuation alignment." Dominic's jaw tightened slightly. "She wouldn't risk prison," he said, more to himself than to her. But Elena had. Across town, Victoria Sloan reviewed the same confirmation notice with quiet precision. "They've initiated formal preliminary inquiry," she said. Elena sat across from her, steady despite the tension that lingered beneath the surface. "That means contract approval is paused." "Yes," Victoria confirmed. "Until they're satisfied." For the first time since the gala humiliation, the power dynamic had shifted. Camille Brooks sensed it before Dominic admitted it. Luxury sponsors postponed appearances. Invitations were reworded carefully. When she attended a private luncheon that afternoon, conversations lowered as she approached. The association that once elevated her now carried risk. Later that evening, she confronted Dominic in his penthouse study. "You said this would settle," she said sharply. "It will," Dominic replied, though the certainty in his voice was thinner now. "They're calling it an inquiry," she pressed. "That word doesn't disappear." Dominic turned toward the skyline. "It disappears when it finds nothing." "And if it finds something?" she asked. He did not answer. Instead, he called Elena. The meeting was arranged in a neutral conference room downtown, secured but discreet. Victoria advised caution but agreed to attend nearby. Dominic entered first, controlled as always, though a faint tension traced his posture. "You've destabilized everything," he said without greeting. "I exposed what was unstable," Elena replied calmly. "You triggered a federal inquiry weeks before approval," he continued. "Do you understand the scale of what you've done?" "Yes," she said evenly. "Do you?" He leaned forward slightly. "Withdraw cooperation. Clarify that this was a misunderstanding. I will restore full financial access. Expand your settlement tenfold. Establish irrevocable trusts for the child." His tone remained measured. Strategic. "You'll be protected," he added. "From scrutiny. From media." Elena met his gaze without flinching. Truth isn't negotiable, she said. His expression hardened. You're emotional. No, she replied softly. You are. The silence between them was heavier than accusation. You think regulators care about you? Dominic asked. They care about documentation, she answered. Outside the building, cameras were already repositioning. News outlets had begun reframing the narrative. Headlines that once questioned Elena's stability now referenced whistleblower allegations against tech billionaire. Public perception was tilting. Dominic stood abruptly. You're risking everything. Elena remained seated. You already did. When he left the room, his composure remained intact. But for the first time, it was defensive rather than dominant. That night, financial networks debated the implications of the federal pause. Analysts speculated about executive accountability. Commentators revisited Camille's earlier interviews, replaying her dismissive remarks in a new light. Camille watched in silence, realizing too late that proximity to power also meant proximity to fallout. Elena returned home and stood by the window overlooking the city. The baby shifted gently beneath her hand, grounding her in something real beyond contracts and compliance. Her phone rang. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. It's escalating, Victoria said. Elena listened carefully. Federal investigators want sworn testimony, Victoria continued. Under oath. The pause that followed carried weight. The freeze had begun as suspension. Now it was becoming prosecution. The subpoenas arrived quietly, but their impact was seismic. Hale Technologies' legal department received simultaneous federal requests for internal communications, offshore transaction records, and executive authorization logs. The language was no longer preliminary. It was procedural. Dominic Hale reviewed the documents in silence, the weight of them settling into the room like gravity. What had begun as an inquiry was now formal investigation. There was no more ambiguity. Forensic auditors had traced a sequence of offshore transfers tied directly to Dominic's biometric authorization key. Each access timestamp aligned with valuation adjustments submitted during federal pre-review disclosures. The pattern wasn't speculative, it was mathematical. Inside the executive conference room, tension replaced loyalty. 2 senior board members announced their resignations within 48 hours, citing personal reasons. Investors began requesting third-party audits. Insurance carriers reviewed liability clauses. Dominic's empire was not collapsing loudly. It was cracking internally. Camille Brooks felt the tremors differently. Luxury brands that once competed for her presence began postponing appearances. A philanthropic board removed her from an upcoming keynote panel without explanation. Calls went unanswered. During a private dinner with one of Dominic's former investors, she sensed distance in every polite smile. You understand how these things look, the investor said carefully. How what looks? Camille asked, though she already knew. Association. That word lingered long after the dinner ended. Back at Hale headquarters, federal investigators uncovered internal email threads revealing coordinated language adjustments in compliance summaries. Phrases like anticipated licensing had replaced conditional authorization. Risk exposure had been softened in deliberate increments. It wasn't one mistake. It was structural manipulation. Dominic studied the growing evidence file with measured calculation. If exposure escalated into criminal liability, blame would need a direction. Nathan Reed's name surfaced in his mind. Former CFO. Direct oversight of valuation documentation. Plausible proximity to accounting discretion. Dominic called his legal team. If this narrows, he said calmly, we clarify delegated authority. His counsel hesitated. The biometric logs tie directly to you. Dominic's jaw tightened slightly. Then context must be reframed. Across town, Elena's body absorbed the stress more visibly. A sharp tightening across her abdomen forced Victoria to rush her to the hospital for precautionary monitoring. Doctors confirmed stress-induced complications but assured her the baby remained stable. "You need rest," the physician advised firmly. "Prolonged stress affects both of you." Elena lay quietly beneath sterile lights, her hand resting over her stomach. She felt the weight of everything, the humiliation, the surveillance, the investigation, but beneath it all, a clarity remained. She had not created this collapse. She had revealed it. Victoria entered the hospital room later that afternoon with cautious optimism. "The custody motion has been dismissed preliminarily," she said. Elena turned her head slowly. "On what grounds?" "Retaliatory timing and lack of substantive evidence," Victoria replied. The judge referenced the ongoing federal inquiry. For the first time in weeks, Elena felt something close to relief. Dominic's attempt to define her instability had weakened. But the investigation had not. Later that evening, federal agents executed additional search warrants at Hale Technologies' secure executive servers. Within encrypted storage partitions, they identified a restricted executive archive labeled Contingency Planning, Private. The metadata indicated limited access. Dominic's biometric authentication required. Back in his penthouse, Dominic received notification of the discovery. His expression did not change, but something behind his composure tightened. That archive had been designed as protection, a repository of strategic risk assessments, internal scenario planning, crisis mapping. It had never been intended for external review. If accessed, its contents could contextualize everything. Or condemn him completely. Camille confronted him that night, her voice edged with fear rather than arrogance. "Tell me this isn't serious," she said. "It's manageable," Dominic replied. But even he no longer sounded convinced. In her hospital bed, Elena received a call from Victoria. "They've located an encrypted executive file," she said quietly. "It appears to contain contingency documentation." Elena closed her eyes briefly. "What kind of contingency?" she asked. "Unknown," Victoria replied. "But it requires Dominic's biometric authorization to unlock." Silence filled the room. Outside the hospital window, the city moved as it always had, indifferent to power shifts and collapsing empires. Inside, the final layer of Dominic's control system had been found. And the only person who could unlock it was Dominic himself. The courtroom was quieter than anyone expected. There were no raised voices, no dramatic exchanges, just a federal judge reviewing a motion that would determine whether Dominic Hale's final layer of protection would remain sealed or become evidence. The encrypted executive archive sat within a secured federal system, inaccessible without Dominic's biometric authorization. His legal team had argued executive privilege, proprietary confidentiality, strategic privacy. The prosecution argued relevance, obstruction risk, and evidentiary necessity. The judge sided with relevance. Dominic stood at the defense table, immaculate as ever in a tailored suit, though the certainty that once defined him had thinned into something more brittle. "Mr. Hale," the judge stated evenly, "you are ordered to provide biometric access to the encrypted archive." The room held its breath. Dominic hesitated, not visibly, but internally. He had created that archive months earlier as contingency planning. Scenario modeling. Crisis response outlines. It had been designed to anticipate risk, not create it. Now it was risk. He placed his thumb against the scanner. The encryption dissolved. Files populated the federal monitor, folders labeled with sterile precision, regulatory containment. Narrative mitigation. Custody leverage. The prosecutor opened an audio file timestamped 3 weeks before the gala incident. Dominic's voice filled the courtroom speakers, clear and unmistakable. Evaluation scrutiny escalates pre-approval, distributed liability framework activates. Spousal authorization exposure creates credible diversion. Custody petition reinforces instability narrative. Media positioning essential. Silence swallowed the room. There was no ambiguity. No room for interpretation. It was a blueprint, not for compliance, but for framing. Elena sat beside Victoria Sloane, hands steady over her stomach. She did not react outwardly. The vindication was not emotional. It was structural. Dominic's attorney leaned in urgently. We can contextualize this. Strategic modeling doesn't imply execution. But the timestamps aligned. The custody petition followed the recording by 48 hours. The gala humiliation by 72. The prosecutor spoke calmly. This audio demonstrates premeditated intent to discredit and shift liability to Mrs. Whitmore. Dominic's posture remained upright, but something inside him shifted. By noon, the recording had reached national news outlets. Tech billionaire recorded plan to frame pregnant wife. Federal inquiry deepens after damning audio evidence. The freeze on the defense contract became permanent termination within hours. Investors distanced publicly. The board issued an emergency statement expressing deep concern. Hale Technologies stock entered rapid decline. Outside corporate headquarters, federal agents waited. Dominic exited the building late that afternoon, cameras flashing across the sidewalk. He maintained composure, but when agents approached with formal arrest documentation for charges including fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy to manipulate regulatory processes, the reality could no longer be managed through optics. There was no resistance. No spectacle. Just the quiet sound of metal closing around control. Across the street, Camille Brooks stood frozen as reporters surged toward her. Did you know about the framing strategy? Were you aware of the custody manipulation? Her silence lasted too long. The image of her laughing at the gala replayed across media cycles, now reframed beneath the audio evidence of Dominic's calculated plan. Association had transformed into implication. Inside the courthouse, the custody case was dismissed entirely. The judge cited documented retaliatory intent and evidentiary confirmation of manipulation. Elena's parental standing was affirmed without qualification. Asset seizure procedures initiated swiftly. Offshore accounts were frozen. Executive compensation packages were flagged. Luxury properties entered federal review. Dominic sat in a secured holding room hours later, the echo of his own recorded voice looping in his mind. He had believed he was safeguarding legacy. He had believed humiliation was strategy. Instead, his own documentation had dismantled him. Back at her apartment, Elena stood quietly by the window, the city illuminated beneath a winter sky. The narrative that once painted her unstable had collapsed under evidence. She felt no triumph, only clarity. Her phone rang. Victoria's name appeared. "It's done," Victoria said. Elena nodded, though Victoria couldn't see it. There was a pause before Victoria continued. "He's requested something." Elena's gaze shifted slightly. From federal custody, Victoria said carefully, "Dominic has formally requested one final meeting with you before arraignment." The empire had fallen. But something unresolved still lingered between them. 3 months later, the noise had quieted, but the consequences had not. Winter sunlight filtered softly through hospital blinds as Elena Whitmore held her newborn son for the first time. Alexander Whitmore Hale arrived just after dawn, healthy and steady, his cry strong and certain. In that moment, the chaos of federal investigations, public humiliation, and courtroom tension felt distant, like a storm that had passed but left its mark on the landscape. Elena studied his face carefully. He would grow up hearing headlines about his father. He would one day read transcripts and recordings. But he would never inherit silence. Outside the hospital, public perception had completed its transformation. The narrative that once painted Elena as unstable had collapsed under documented evidence. Legal analysts now cited her case as a rare example of internal exposure preventing federal contract corruption. Media commentary shifted from gossip to accountability. Elena did not grant interviews. Instead, she announced the formation of the Whitmore Initiative for Ethical Technology Compliance, a foundation dedicated to independent oversight in government contracting and executive transparency. Former regulators joined its advisory board. Compliance experts volunteered. The message was simple: structure matters. Camille Brooks experienced a different transformation. Her invitations dwindled. Brand partnerships dissolved without public explanation. Social circles that once thrived on proximity to Dominic's influence now treated association as liability. The laughter captured at the gala resurfaced repeatedly across news cycles, replayed beneath audio recordings of Dominic's framing strategy. One afternoon, Camille stood outside the federal courthouse as Dominic was escorted inside for sentencing proceedings. Reporters surrounded her immediately. "Did you know about the contingency recording? Were you aware he planned to discredit his wife?" She blinked beneath camera flashes, the composure that once defined her fractured by uncertainty. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I believed what he told me." The answer satisfied no one. Inside a private visitation room weeks later, Elena agreed to meet Dominic one final time. He looked diminished, not physically weakened, but stripped of projection. The controlled confidence had faded into something more reflective. "You didn't have to come," he said as she entered. "I know," Elena replied. Alexander remained with a nurse outside. This conversation belonged to history, not innocence. Dominic exhaled slowly. "I convinced myself it was strategic. Temporary. That once the contract secured, everything would stabilize." "You recorded a plan to frame me," she said calmly. "I was protecting the company," he replied. "You were protecting yourself," she corrected. Silence lingered. "I regret it," Dominic said finally. "Not the money. Not the valuation. I regret losing my family." Elena studied him for a long moment. "You didn't lose it," she said softly. "You traded it." The truth landed without anger. She reached into her coat pocket and removed her wedding ring. It had remained with her through humiliation, investigation, and testimony, not as sentiment, but as reminder. She placed it gently on the metal table between them. "This isn't revenge," she said. "It's release." Dominic did not reach for it. Outside the courthouse that same afternoon, Camille watched Dominic being led past reporters again, cameras flashing across a man once described as untouchable. The sound of handcuffs closing echoed faintly across the marble steps. For the first time, she did not stand beside him. She stood alone. Elena left through a private corridor, Alexander cradled carefully in her arms. Victoria Sloan joined her near the vehicle. "It's over," Victoria said quietly. "For him," Elena replied. As they prepared to leave, a federal prosecutor approached with measured professionalism. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "another technology firm under preliminary review has expressed willingness to cooperate. Your insight into liability distribution and executive documentation could be invaluable." Elena listened carefully. Dominic's empire had fallen because it relied on secrecy disguised as strategy. Her future would rely on transparency disguised as reform. She looked down at her son, his breathing steady against her chest. "My son will inherit integrity," she said quietly. The prosecutor nodded. As the car door closed and the courthouse faded into distance, the arc of the story shifted. Dominic Hale's downfall was complete. But Elena Whitmore's influence had only just begun. Stories like this aren't just about power or scandal, they're about choices and consequences. If you believe truth still matters in a world built on influence, stay connected here. Because not every story of accountability makes the headlines. And if this one stayed with you, you already know why the next story will matter too. Let me ask you something honestly. If the person you trusted most publicly humiliated you to protect their empire, and you had the proof to destroy it, would you expose the truth knowing it could cost you everything? Or would you walk away quietly for the sake of peace? What would you have chosen?